What if the clarity you've been searching for isn't something you find, but something you build? Imagine waking up each day with a calm mind, unshaken by the noise, the pressure, and the uncertainty that surrounds you. Now ask yourself this: why does your mind feel like a battlefield? Why do you feel exhausted, even after a full night's sleep? It's not your schedule, it's not your phone, it's the war inside your head, between who you pretend to be and who you truly are, the overthinking that burns through your peace, the regrets that echo louder than your thoughts, the need to control everything and everyone around you, even when it's tearing you apart. You've been told that clarity will come when life gets easier. That peace is something you'll feel once things calm down. But the Stoics knew better. Clarity isn't a reward, it's a discipline. It's not given, it's earned through choices that strip away illusion and force you to face yourself. If you're brave enough to walk that path, then subscribe, to finally start following yourself, not for more noise, but for something ancient, enduring, and true. Welcome to your mind, rebuilt through Stoicism. You wake up and the world is already waiting. Notifications, messages, opinions. It pulls at you before you've even had the chance to think for yourself. Most people never question it. They scroll, react, absorb, until their thoughts aren't even theirs anymore. Slowly, quietly, the mind becomes rented property, owned by trends, borrowed from influences, shaped by headlines. You don't feel it at first. It creeps in. The anxiety, the restlessness, the pressure to have an opinion on everything. But the deeper truth? You weren't born with this noise. It was handed to you, wrapped in convenience, sold as connection. And somewhere along the way, you accepted it as normal. But clarity, real clarity, doesn't live in that noise. It's not found by consuming more, reacting faster, or knowing everything. Clarity begins the moment you choose to subtract, to remove what doesn't belong, not just in your schedule, but in your thinking. That's the first lesson the Stoics understood. Your peace doesn't depend on what the world gives you. It depends on what you refuse to let in. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. But how often do we give that power away without even noticing? Think about how often your mood is dictated by someone else's comment. How easily you're pulled out of focus by a trending opinion or a photo of someone living a life you think you should have. Every time you hand your attention to something that doesn't serve your values, you're spending a piece of your mind. And those pieces add up. What's left is a mind that no longer feels like home. It becomes fragmented, distracted, shaped by the world instead of shaping how you move through it. The Stoic path isn't about isolation or pretending the world doesn't exist. It's about returning to the source. It's a stripping away, not an adding on. A life lived from the inside out, not the outside in. That starts with a simple but powerful act, choosing what you allow in, choosing what you respond to. Not everything deserves your reaction. Not every battle is yours to fight. When you reclaim your attention, you begin to reclaim your identity. The world will always try to tell you who you should be. It will present you with scripts, roles to play, paths to follow, beliefs to adopt. And if you don't pause to question them, you'll spend your entire life performing someone else's version of success. The mind, when untended, conforms, but when guarded, it sharpens. This is why the Stoics practiced daily reflection. It wasn't for ego, it was for clarity. A moment to sit with the question, are these thoughts truly mine? Or have I picked them up without realizing it? You don't need to abandon the world to regain your mind. You need to return to the driver's seat. You need to take responsibility for what you think, what you believe, and what you chase. That's not always easy. especially when everything around you is designed to distract you from yourself. But clarity isn't supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be earned. Start small. Notice the moments where you let others dictate how you feel. Pay attention to the thoughts that repeat in your head. Where did they come from? Whose voice is that really? Then begin the quiet process of subtraction, not to escape the world, but to reclaim your place within it, not to reject life, but to live it on your own terms. The truth is, most people never take this path. It's easier to conform, it's easier to consume. But those who choose to reclaim their minds, they become unshakable, not because they control the world, but because they've stopped letting the world control them. And when that happens, when the noise fades, even just a little, you'll feel it. That stillness, that sharpness, that sense of finally coming home to yourself. It won't come from a perfect routine or some hack or a new app. It'll come from subtraction, from silence, from remembering that everything you truly needed was always within you, buried beneath the noise you never chose and no longer need. You know what matters to you. You've always known. But somewhere along the way, that voice, the one that used to guide you, started getting drowned out. Now it's buried under 1,000 notifications, opinions, fears, and comparisons. And it's not because you've lost your values. It's not because you're weak. It's because the modern world is louder than it's ever been, and it's trained you to believe that silence means you're falling behind. That if you're not reacting, you're irrelevant. That if you're not constantly plugged in, you're missing something important. But the truth is, the only thing you're missing is yourself. The noise doesn't show up with a warning. It sneaks in. It begins with checking the news in the morning before your feet even touch the ground. Then it becomes scrolling through other people's lives during breakfast, comparing your start to their highlight reels. You go through your day half present, pulled in every direction by information you didn't ask for. You listen to the world more than you listen to your own thoughts. And slowly, the things you actually care about start to feel distant. Not gone, but quiet, like a signal blocked by static. Clarity doesn't die with a bang. It fades. Not from neglect, but from noise. From reacting to every little thing. From needing to have a take on every event. From fearing that if you don't speak, you'll be forgotten. That's not clarity. That's exhaustion dressed as engagement. And at some point, you have to ask yourself, am I even thinking or just responding? Am I choosing my direction, or am I just too distracted to see that I've stopped steering? The Stoics understood that silence isn't just golden, it's strategic. It's where the real thinking happens. It's where intention lives. Marcus Aurelius, despite the chaos of ruling an empire, still made time to sit with his thoughts, to write, to observe. He wasn't avoiding the world, he was building armor from within it. Without that silence, he would have lost himself in the noise. And isn't that what most people do today? Lose themselves by never pausing long enough to be found. But silence in the Stoic sense isn't just about turning the volume down on your surroundings. It's about learning to recognize what doesn't deserve your attention. It's not the absence of sound. It's the refusal to let things hijack your focus. It's seeing a headline and choosing not to click. It's hearing gossip and not repeating it. It's noticing that anxious thought rise and letting it pass like a cloud instead of climbing on board and letting it carry you somewhere you didn't want to go. Carl Jung once said, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order." But that order isn't found by accident. It's uncovered when you stop adding more noise in the hope that one day it'll all start to make sense. It won't. Chaos doesn't organize itself. You organize your mind by choosing stillness over stimulation, not once, but over and over again. And that choice is hard. Because distraction feels productive. It gives you the illusion that you're involved, informed, connected, but you know deep down that it's shallow. It's surface-level thinking, the kind that scatters your energy and leaves you more anxious than you started. Clarity doesn't come from reacting to everything. It comes from responding to the few things that matter with your full presence. That's what the Stoics meant by control, not controlling the world, but controlling what enters your mind and stays there. This is where the practice begins, in small, almost invisible decisions. Putting your phone away during a meal, driving without music, sitting with discomfort instead of escaping it through screens. These aren't grand gestures. They're simple acts of rebellion against a culture that tells you constant stimulation is normal. It's not. It's chaos disguised as connection. There's a reason the mind feels tired even when the body is rested. It's because attention is being pulled in too many directions without a break. You can't think deeply when you're interrupted every 2 minutes. You can't find purpose when you're addicted to novelty. And you can't hear your own voice if you never give it the space to speak. That's the danger of noise. It makes you forget what your own thoughts sound like. The discipline of silence is what separates the reactive from the resilient. Because the world will never stop offering you distractions. It will keep tempting you with urgency. But clarity is built by learning to say no. Not just once, but constantly. No to the argument that doesn't matter. No to the comment that isn't worth responding to. No to the thought spiral that only leads to the same dead end. Every no to noise is a yes to yourself, a yes to presence, a yes to inner space where real insight can finally emerge. People often think that finding peace means fixing everything around them, but the Stoics knew that peace comes when you fix your relationship with attention, when you realize you don't have to give your mind to everything just because it's loud. The most powerful person in the room isn't always the one who speaks. It's the one who listens, chooses, and responds on their own terms. That's true strength. And it's built in silence. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, don't ask, "What more do I need to do?" Ask, "What can I ignore?" Not because it's unimportant to the world, but because it's unimportant to your purpose. That distinction is what keeps the mind clean, not empty, not disengaged, but clear, like water that reflects the truth only when it's still. You won't silence the noise of the world forever, but you can train your mind to stop being owned by it. You can practice giving less of yourself to what doesn't serve you, and when you do, something powerful happens. You begin to hear that voice again, the one you thought you'd lost, the one that speaks in calm certainty, not panic, the one that knows what matters because it's no longer competing with everything that doesn't. That's clarity, and it starts the moment you stop letting the world speak louder than your own soul. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work or lack of sleep. It comes from trying to control everything, every situation, every outcome, every reaction from others. You carry it in your chest, in your shoulders, in the quiet moments when your thoughts speed up instead of slow down. Most people don't even realize they're doing it. They think they're being responsible, prepared, smart. But behind all of that is fear. Fear that if they don't control every variable, something will go wrong. Someone will get upset. The plan will fall apart. And when things inevitably don't go according to that plan, they spiral, blaming themselves, blaming others, wondering why it still wasn't enough. But the truth is, the failure was never in their effort. It was in the illusion. We grow up believing that control is power, that the more control we have over our lives, the safer we'll be. So we plan every detail. We overthink every word. We try to predict people's actions, protect our image, and preempt disappointment. But life doesn't work that way. It's not a formula. It's unpredictable, messy, and full of variables outside your reach. And the more you cling to the fantasy of controlling everything, the more powerless you actually feel, because every unexpected moment feels like a personal failure. Every loss feels like a weakness. Every disruption becomes a threat. That's why anxiety grows in the gap between what we try to control and what we actually can. Epictetus once said, "Some things are up to us and some things are not." Most people hear that and move on, but those who stop and understand it, really understand it, change the entire way they live. Because that single truth redefines your entire relationship with power. You don't gain strength by grabbing at everything. You gain it by releasing what doesn't belong to you and sharpening your focus on what does. You can't control what someone else thinks of you. You can't control traffic, illness, timing, rejection, or whether someone keeps their promise. You can't control whether people understand you, whether the world is fair, or whether the outcome matches your intention. And yet these are the things we carry, silently, obsessively. We play out arguments in our heads. We rehearse explanations. We brace for impact before anything has even happened. All of it, wasted energy directed at forces that were never ours to command. And when you release that, when you stop playing God over the parts of life that were never in your hands to begin with, something strange happens. You feel lighter, clearer, and ironically, stronger, because your energy returns to where it's supposed to be, your response, your attitude, your effort, your values. These are the only things that have ever truly been yours, and when you give them your full attention, you move through life with a quiet kind of confidence, the kind that doesn't need to force anything. It just moves forward, focused and free. Letting go of control doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean giving up. It means choosing your battles wisely. It means showing up fully where you have influence and surrendering the rest without guilt. That's not weakness. That's mastery. Because most people waste their lives trying to fix things that were never broken, just uncontrollable. And in the process, they break themselves, trying to be everything, predict everything, fix everyone. But you're not here to carry the weight of the entire world. You're here to carry your role in it, and to carry it well. That choice, the one between reaction and intention, is where all your power lives. You can't undo the event. You can't change how someone treats you. But you can choose what it means to you. You can choose how you respond. And over time, those choices become your character, your peace, your foundation. It takes courage to let go of control, especially when your mind has been trained to believe that vigilance equals safety, that if you're not worrying about it, you're not prepared. But that kind of hypervigilance isn't protection, it's paralysis. It keeps you stuck in anticipation, never present, always bracing. And presence is where clarity lives. It's where life actually happens. Not in your imagined future, not in your rehearsed explanations, but here, now, in this moment. And this moment only requires one thing, your honest response. Every time you choose response over reaction, acceptance over resistance, presence over anxiety, you reclaim a little more of yourself. Not the self that's shaped by fear, but the self that's shaped by reason, by calm, by intention. The Stoics weren't detached from life. They were immersed in it. They just refused to be ruled by it. They practiced emotional freedom by anchoring themselves in the only place they had any real control, their own mind. That's the difference between surface strength and real strength. Surface strength fights everything. Real strength flows with what is. It knows when to act and when to let go. It doesn't chase control. It channels power, quietly, patiently, intelligently, because it knows the mind is not a battlefield unless you make it one. So the next time life doesn't go your way, pause. Ask yourself, not why it happened, but how you will choose to meet it. What will you do with this moment? What is within your hands and what isn't? That question is a doorway. One side leads to resistance and frustration. The other leads to peace and freedom. Letting go is not about being passive. It's about being precise, about directing your strength exactly where it matters and nowhere else. That's not just philosophy. That's wisdom in action, and it's yours. If you're willing to release the illusion and step into what's real, what's yours, what's powerful, let go, not to lose power, but to finally claim it. There's a quiet kind of suffering that slips into the lives of people who've lost their structure. It doesn't show up dramatically. It's not always loud. It creeps in slowly, disguised as freedom. Skipping the early wake-up, indulging in comfort, postponing the uncomfortable task just one more time. At first, it feels like kindness to yourself. You tell yourself you're being flexible, you're not forcing things, but over time, something starts to feel off. You don't know why you're more anxious, why your thoughts feel cluttered, why motivation seems so out of reach. The truth is, it's not that you're failing at life. It's that you've forgotten how to hold the line for yourself. Discipline, when misunderstood, looks like restriction. But to the Stoics, it was the opposite. It was the practice that created peace. Because the mind without discipline doesn't rest. It wanders. It panics. It reaches for whatever soothes it in the moment without thinking about the cost. And the cost is always there, in wasted time, in guilt, in the slow erosion of self-respect. Most people don't realize they've become prisoners to their impulses until it's already taken something important: their focus, their energy, their trust in themselves. That's the tragedy of an undisciplined mind. It doesn't explode, it fades, from purpose, from clarity, from self-command. True discipline isn't about rigidity or self-punishment. It's about hygiene, like brushing your teeth, like washing your face. It's what keeps the mental environment clean, sharp, functional. The Stoics knew this well. They didn't seek discipline to impress others or chase perfection. They trained their minds to stay clear, not for the sake of control, but for the sake of freedom. Because what is freedom really, if you're still a slave to every passing emotion? If a single distraction can derail your day? If comfort has more power over you than your own vision? Seneca once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And he was right. You can live in a free world and still be shackled to your habits, still be pulled in every direction by whatever feels easiest. But the mind wasn't built to serve comfort. It was built to create, to endure, to hold a vision and walk toward it, no matter what stands in the way. That kind of mental integrity isn't found in the heat of the moment. It's built quietly, in the margins, in the early mornings, in the deliberate routines, in the decision to act from principle, not emotion. Discipline is how the mind returns to order. When everything outside is chaos, your discipline becomes the compass. It's not about being harsh, it's about knowing what kind of life you want to build and holding yourself to it even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient, because that's where growth lives, in the tension between what's easy and what's necessary. It's not about denying yourself joy, it's about learning to choose joy that lasts over pleasure that fades, about realizing that the short-term hit of dopamine is not worth the long-term weight of regret. People often wait for motivation before taking action, but discipline doesn't wait. Discipline moves, regardless of how it feels, and in doing so, it builds something far more powerful than motivation. It builds momentum. It proves to your nervous system that you are not at the mercy of moods or urges, that you can feel resistance and still act, that you can wake up tired, anxious, uninspired, and still show up for yourself. That's where real confidence comes from. Not from the days when everything goes right, but from the days when it doesn't, and you still do what needs to be done. The world tells you to follow your feelings, but feelings aren't facts. They fluctuate, they lie, they scream for attention and vanish without warning. If you build your life on them, you'll be building on sand. Discipline builds on something deeper: values, intention, the kind of person you want to be, not just the kind of comfort you want to feel. It anchors you. It turns your day into a deliberate act, not a series of reactions. And when that discipline is consistent, your entire life begins to shift. Not because the world gets easier, but because you become stronger. Discipline is one way of making the unconscious conscious, of becoming aware of the patterns that pull you off course, of interrupting them, of choosing again and again to be guided by clarity rather than compulsion. It's not about controlling every thought. It's about noticing them, questioning them, and acting from the part of you that chooses, not the part that reacts. And over time, this practice becomes part of who you are. It becomes second nature to pause before reaching for distraction, to hold the line when you want to quit, to speak only when it serves, to do what needs to be done, even if no one's watching. That's not about being perfect. It's about being aligned with your values, with your vision, with the version of yourself you're building day by day. People wait for clarity to strike like lightning, but clarity is built. It's built every time you choose structure over chaos, presence over escape, meaning over impulse. That's the quiet power of discipline. It clears the fog. It puts you back in control of your energy. And it reminds you, moment by moment, that you are capable of more than comfort. You're capable of depth, of strength, of stillness in motion. The undisciplined life is noisy, reactive, scattered. It pulls you away from yourself, slowly, until you forget what it feels like to be fully grounded. But the disciplined life? It's calm, intentional, clean, not always easy, but always worth it. Because discipline doesn't just change your habits, it changes your relationship with yourself. And that, more than anything else, is what determines whether your mind becomes your sanctuary or your prison. Most people think clarity is something you fight for, that if you try hard enough, think long enough, push through the noise with enough force, you'll somehow arrive at peace. But the more you push, the louder things get. The more you resist, the more exhausted you become. You try to silence your thoughts, to force focus, to bend your life into shape. And yet, the mind still spins. It still clings to what happened, what didn't happen, what might happen next. That's not failure. That's a misunderstanding of where clarity comes from. Because peace isn't something you achieve through resistance. It's something you uncover through acceptance. There's a deep kind of relief that comes when you stop arguing with reality, when you stop wishing things were different and start facing them exactly as they are. It doesn't mean you give up. It doesn't mean you stop improving your life or holding high standards. But it does mean you stop pretending. You stop living in a fantasy of what should have happened, how someone should have behaved, how the world ought to work. You come face to face with what is. And in that moment, when you finally stop fighting, you feel it. That first breath of real stillness. Acceptance is not weakness. It's not surrender. It's strength without tension. It's choosing to see the world clearly, without the filters of fear, ego, or nostalgia. Because when you remove those filters, what you're left with is truth. And truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is always the beginning of freedom. The Stoics didn't chase illusions. They stared life in the face. They expected loss, disappointment, discomfort, not because they were pessimists, but because they understood that wishing things were easier only makes you weaker. Real mastery begins when you meet the world as it is, not as you hoped it would be. Carl Jung said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." And you see this play out everywhere. The more you resist a painful emotion, the more power it gains. The more you suppress a truth you don't want to face, the more chaos it creates beneath the surface. You can distract yourself for a while. You can rationalize, but deep down, you know what you're avoiding. And that avoidance is what keeps your mind cluttered. Clarity doesn't come from fixing everything. It comes from being willing to face it all without running. Think about how much energy is lost in denial, how much inner noise is created by trying to rewrite the past or predict the future. You replay conversations, build imaginary arguments, rehearse outcomes that may never happen. None of it brings peace, because the mind wasn't designed to control life. It was designed to interpret it, to respond to it. And the quality of that response depends entirely on how willing you are to stand in front of the present moment and say, "This is what's real." Acceptance isn't passive, it's active. It takes awareness, humility, and courage. It means recognizing your limits without being defeated by them. It means holding space for grief without trying to fast forward through it. It means letting someone walk away instead of begging them to stay, not because it doesn't hurt, but because you understand that control is not love. That attachment is not the same thing as connection, and that forcing what isn't meant for you will only delay what is. When you start living from that place, where you stop resisting the rain and start walking through it, you realize something important, that the pain you feared was survivable, that the loss didn't break you, that the silence wasn't empty. It was full of messages you'd never heard before, because you were too busy shouting over life to hear what it was trying to tell you. And the moment you go quiet, truly quiet, that's when the insight comes. Not as a flash of genius, but as something simpler, a knowing, a grounded recognition that you can endure more than you thought, that you can hold both sorrow and peace in the same breath, that you don't need life to go your way in order to live it fully. Marcus Aurelius, in all his power, still reminded himself daily to accept what fate brings. Not to roll over, but to stay steady. To keep showing up even when the world doesn't meet his expectations. That's what made him powerful. Not his status, not his influence, but his refusal to be broken by what he could not control. That same strength lives in you. And it's not something you build by force. It's something you uncover by softening where you've always tensed, by breathing into what you've always avoided, by staying present with what you were always told to escape. And it begins with small moments. The moment you forgive someone, not because they asked, but because you're ready to stop carrying the weight. The moment you let yourself cry without shame. The moment you look at your life, with all its flaws and missed turns, and say, "This is where I am, and that's okay." That's the ground, the base, the soil from which everything meaningful grows. You don't build peace on fantasy. You build it on the raw, unfiltered truth of now. Acceptance doesn't erase pain, but it transforms your relationship with it. You stop seeing discomfort as a problem and start recognizing it as part of the path. You stop needing to feel good all the time and start asking yourself a deeper question. Am I growing? Am I honest? Am I aligned with what really matters? When you clear the mind by accepting reality, you become dangerous in the best way, because nothing surprises you, nothing owns you. You've made peace with uncertainty, and now you move freely, not because the world makes it easy, but because you've stopped needing it to. You've stopped begging for clarity from a world that thrives on confusion. Instead, you've built it inside of you, one quiet decision at a time. This is the power of acceptance. It's not loud, it doesn't always look strong, but it is the root of all resilience. When you stop needing life to cooperate, you become unstoppable, Not in your control over the world, but in your capacity to adapt, to feel, to stay grounded in the storm. And when that becomes your default, your mind stops spinning. It clears, not because everything is perfect, but because you finally stopped resisting what is. And that, more than anything, is where mastery begins. There's a quiet kind of suffering that comes from not knowing why you're doing what you're doing. You wake up, move through the day, respond to messages, handle tasks, perform roles, but there's no anchor beneath it. Everything feels like motion but not movement. You might be busy, you might be successful by every conventional measure, and still there's that feeling, like you're floating, like you could be knocked off course at any moment. That's what happens when purpose is missing, when the deeper why is unclear. Even the smallest disruption feels overwhelming, because without direction, every distraction looks like a possibility, every setback feels like a collapse. But when you're anchored in purpose, when you know, even in a quiet way, what truly matters to you, everything starts to reorient. The noise doesn't disappear, but it loses its power. The storms still come, but they don't shake you the same way. Because now, you're not reacting to everything, you're moving towards something chosen, something true. Purpose doesn't mean you have your entire life figured out. It doesn't require a 5-year plan or a grand ambition. It just means you're no longer willing to wander aimlessly. A lot of people confuse purpose with passion, but purpose is deeper. Passion can flicker. It can change with the seasons. Purpose, on the other hand, is like a compass. It doesn't scream for attention. It simply points. It reminds you who you are when you're tempted to forget. It gives meaning to the repetition, to the difficult days, to the sacrifices that no one else sees. And it gives clarity to the mind because it filters what matters and what doesn't. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that's exactly what purpose demands, that you stop pretending, that you let go of the masks you wear to be accepted, that you stop pursuing paths that impress others but drain you. Because the moment you do, you'll feel it, that inner click, that alignment, like your thoughts, your actions, and your values are finally in the same room. That's when the mind quiets. Not because everything is easy, but because it finally feels meaningful. Without that alignment, you chase everything and catch nothing. You start one thing, then doubt it. You compare yourself to someone else's progress. You try to match their pace, their lifestyle, their narrative. But none of it fits. And deep down, you know it. Because you weren't meant to copy someone else's path. You were meant to walk your own. That doesn't mean it will always be glamorous. Sometimes purpose looks like showing up when no one claps. Sometimes it means working behind the scenes, building quietly, without the rush of applause. But that's where the power is. In consistency. In knowing that even on the hard days, there's a reason you're still standing. When you live without purpose, your energy scatters. You get exhausted, not from doing too much, but from doing the wrong things. From constantly shifting gears, switching focus, chasing validation, and running from discomfort. But when you root yourself in something deeper, you conserve energy. You make clearer choices. You're not so easily baited by every new trend or distracted by every passing emotion, because you know what you're building, you know why you're here, and that knowing brings clarity. Stoicism teaches us not to seek peace in the absence of chaos, but in the presence of something greater, something stable, even as the world changes. That's what purpose becomes, your internal reference point, the thing you return to when you're lost, the answer to the question, why does this matter to me? And once you know that, life changes. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop negotiating your values for approval. You stop tolerating things that drain you just to keep the peace. Because now peace comes from within. Purpose simplifies things. It doesn't make them easier, but it strips away the unnecessary. You stop needing to impress everyone. You stop bouncing between expectations. You learn to say no, not because you're rigid, but because you're clear. And clarity is a form of self-respect. When you know your direction, you're not threatened by detours. You're not paralyzed by uncertainty. Because even if the path isn't straight, the intention is. This doesn't mean your purpose has to be revolutionary. Sometimes your why is deeply personal. Sometimes it's healing a part of yourself that was never loved properly. Sometimes it's breaking a cycle that's lasted for generations. Sometimes it's creating beauty in a world that forgets to look for it. That's enough. You don't owe the world a justification for your values, but you do owe yourself honesty. Ask yourself what actually matters to you, not what you've been told should matter, not what looks good online, not what keeps others comfortable, but what makes you feel alive, even quietly. What helps you sleep with a clear conscience? What would make the struggle worth it, even if no one ever said, "Thank you"? Because that's where your purpose is hiding, not in achievement, but in alignment. And once you find that, protect it. Build your habits around it. Let it guide your decisions. Let it be the reason you stay disciplined, the reason you rest, the reason you speak up or stay silent. Let it be the lens through which you interpret your pain. Because even suffering makes more sense when it serves something higher. Even uncertainty is easier to endure when it's in service of something real. You don't need to rush this process. Clarity takes time, but you do need to start listening to yourself more than the noise around you. You need to stop outsourcing your worth and start choosing your path. And once you do, your life may not get easier, but it will feel more like your own. Your mind will begin to quiet. Your steps will feel steadier, and in a world that thrives on confusion, that clarity will make you powerful. Let your purpose be your anchor, so when the storms come, and they will, you don't drift, you don't collapse, you adjust your sails, you stay the course, because even if the weather changes, your direction doesn't. And that, more than anything, is what it means to live with a clear mind. There's a noise inside us that no external silence can fix. You could sit in the quietest room, far from traffic, voices, and interruptions. But if your mind is still reaching outward for answers, you won't hear peace. Because real peace doesn't begin outside. It starts when you stop outsourcing your sense of direction to things and people that were never built to carry it. We look for validation, like it's oxygen, convincing ourselves that if enough people approve of us, if enough voices agree, we'll finally calm down. But instead, we get more anxious, more addicted to feedback, more uncertain when it doesn't come. And that's the paradox. Every time you look outside to quiet your doubt, you strengthen it. You teach your mind to wait for permission. You hand over the keys to your stability. Self-reliance doesn't mean isolation. It doesn't mean you cut off from everyone or pretend you don't care. That's pride, not power. True self-reliance is quiet. It's not showy. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply means your peace is no longer a group project, that your calm isn't at the mercy of someone else's mood, that your sense of worth doesn't spike or crash depending on who's watching. The Stoics didn't teach detachment because they hated people. They taught it because they understood how easily we give our minds away. One compliment can lift you. One insult can ruin your day. One rejection can spiral you into doubt. When your peace is built on other people's opinions, it will always be on unstable ground. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And that awakening is painful at first, because when you stop chasing external fixes, you're left with your own silence. And that silence can feel uncomfortable, But that's also where it begins. The stillness, the center, the realization that you can face your own thoughts and not flinch, that you can sit with uncertainty without rushing to numb it, that you can feel lost and not panic, because now you trust yourself to find the way back, not through noise, but through alignment. It's tempting to think the answer is always out there, in a podcast, a conversation, a mentor, a book. And yes, those things help, but only when they sharpen your inner compass, not replace it. The mind becomes clear when it becomes sovereign, when it's no longer pulled in 100 directions, asking, what do they think? Or, am I doing this right? But instead turns inward and asks, is this true for me? That's not selfish. That's not arrogant. That's responsibility. Self-reliance also means emotional self-containment. It doesn't mean you don't feel. It means your feelings don't spill into everything uncontrollably. You don't use them to manipulate. You don't expect others to fix what only you can face. You learn to hold your own emotion, examine it, and choose your response with intention. This is where the quiet starts to build. Because now your mind isn't in constant reaction mode. It's not waiting on an apology, an explanation, or a response to feel okay. It's steady because you are steady. There's a kind of freedom that comes from being able to say, I can handle it. Not because it's easy, but because you've built the inner structure that allows you to move through life without collapsing every time it gets heavy. Most people don't realize how much of their stress comes not from what's happening, but from the belief that they need someone else to fix it. We've been taught to outsource strength, but Stoicism flips that. It says, you already have what you need, not all figured out, but enough to take the next step, enough to sit with discomfort instead of running from it, enough to stop chasing people who don't see your value, enough to stop begging for closure and start giving it to yourself. When your mind is no longer a slave to the approval of others, it becomes a sanctuary. When your self-worth stops rising and falling with your circumstances, your presence becomes powerful. People can feel it, not because you're loud, but because you're rooted. You don't flinch at silence. You don't chase attention. You don't perform for applause. You show up with calm because you've made peace your responsibility, not someone else's job. And that's a shift, a deep one, because it's not taught often. The world will tell you to build connections, seek community, find mentors, and all of that has value. But if you don't build the inner world first, you'll bring your chaos into every interaction. You'll cling, over-explain, overthink, and get thrown off by every unreturned call or unanswered message. Not because you're weak, but because you haven't realized yet. Your worth isn't in their hands. It never was. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop needing. You stop assigning people the job of making you feel okay. And once you do, your relationships change too. They become cleaner, lighter, freer. You connect because you want to, not because you're afraid to be alone. You speak your truth because it matters to you, not because you're trying to convince anyone. You give without strings. You leave without rage. You stay without fear. You let go without guilt. When you reach that place, when your clarity is no longer dependent on someone else's validation, you start to hear your own voice again. The quiet one, the steady one, the one that knew all along. And that voice? That's the signal, the direction, the compass, the calm beneath the storm. And that's where the power is. Not in having all the answers, but in no longer abandoning yourself to get them. The more you return to your own mind, your own center, your own values, the less you'll need to chase the world. Because you'll realize the real quiet, the one you've been searching for, it isn't out there. It's already inside you, waiting, ready, steady, unshaken. Sometimes the most important thing you'll ever do is simply keep showing up. not with fireworks, not with some grand transformation, but quietly, repeatedly, on the days when no one's watching, on the mornings when it all feels pointless. That's where real progress begins, not in the applause, not in the praise, but in those moments when your mind tells you it doesn't matter, and you choose to keep going anyway. The world has conditioned us to think that growth must be visible, that transformation must be loud, that if we can't post it, track it, or show it off, it must not be real. But the Stoics knew better. They understood that the deepest growth often makes the least noise. It happens slowly, quietly, beneath the surface of your daily life. It's the choice to not yell back, the pause before a bad decision, the breath you take instead of sending that angry message. It's the tiny shift in how you speak to yourself in the mirror, the invisible battles you win that no one will ever clap for. That's the strange truth about becoming clear-minded. It doesn't look like much from the outside. There's no medal for not overreacting, no trophy for staying calm, no spotlight when you resist the urge to numb yourself with distraction. And yet, every time you choose presence over chaos, you're changing something fundamental. You're retraining the way your mind responds to life. You're building clarity not as a feeling, but as a habit. It's easy to commit when the rewards are immediate. But what about when they're not? What about the weeks that blur together, the days that feel flat, the routines that feel repetitive and lifeless? That's where most people fall off, because they confuse silence with failure. They expect the universe to cheer every step. But wisdom doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives when you stop needing it, when you detach from the performance and begin to live by principle. Carl Jung said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And those quiet actions, especially the ones no one sees, are what shape your character. Not the plans, not the intentions, the practice, the consistency, the way you show up when it's boring, when it's lonely, when it's tempting to quit and start over, yet again. There is no shortcut. No burst of motivation will carry you through the 1,000 small acts of discipline. Only a commitment to the process will. Clarity isn't something you get in one revelation. It's something you build with each repeated effort. It's like water dripping on stone, not dramatic but persistent. It carves out focus. It deepens your stillness, but only if you keep showing up, even when the results don't come fast, even when you feel stuck. Because you're not stuck, you're forming roots, and roots don't grow in the light. They grow in the quiet, beneath the surface, where no one else can see. Sometimes clarity means embracing the silence, not just tolerating it, but learning to trust it. To understand that stillness isn't stagnation, it's incubation. It's where ideas mature, where strength develops, where purpose gets refined. The most dangerous thing you can do to your mind is interrupt this process with doubt. To give up simply because the path isn't dramatic enough, because when you stop showing up, you stop growing. But when you keep showing up, something slowly changes. Not always in your life, but in you. And that's the shift that matters most, because a clear mind doesn't need immediate results to stay on course. It doesn't chase constant validation. It trusts the process. It understands that progress isn't always visible, but it is always cumulative. One clear thought leads to another. One disciplined act opens the door to the next. One day of calm builds a new threshold for the next storm. You're not just practicing behavior, you're building identity, quietly, brick by brick, thought by thought, day by day. And yes, you'll have setbacks. You'll feel like nothing is changing. But that's part of the journey. Real clarity includes resistance. It includes doubt. But it moves through it anyway, not because it's certain, but because it's committed. The Stoics didn't promise perfection. They taught perseverance. That peace is not a prize you win, but a standard you uphold, especially when it feels hardest to do so. This is what separates those who live intentionally from those who react to life. The ones who continue to show up are the ones who learn how to see, not just with their eyes, but with their insight. They learn to read between the lines of their own emotions, to notice the subtle shifts, to understand that growth isn't always about more, it's often about less. Less noise, less rush, less self-judgment, less expectation for everything to feel magical. The clearest minds are built in the most unglamorous ways. Waking up early when you could sleep in, finishing the task you promised yourself you would, sitting with your thoughts when every part of you wants to escape, and doing it again the next day. That's how clarity forms, not with a bang, but with quiet repetition, with patience, with presence, with practice. So don't underestimate those quiet efforts. Don't dismiss the days that feel empty. Don't walk away from the path just because it doesn't impress anyone. Because the truth is, if you keep showing up, clarity will come. Not all at once, not in a grand moment, but piece by piece, until one day you look back and realize your mind is stronger, calmer, clearer, not because you waited for the perfect moment, but because you built it quietly, relentlessly, faithfully. True stillness isn't something that happens when life becomes quiet. It's something that's forged in the noise, built in the fire, not found in the absence of it. The more you run from discomfort, the more you become a slave to it. But the moment you begin to seek it deliberately, something shifts. The anxiety doesn't vanish, but your relationship with it changes. You stop flinching. You stop trying to escape every hard moment. And that's where the foundation of clarity begins to solidify, when you stop asking for comfort and start asking for strength. Most people confuse peace with avoidance. They think stillness comes from removing problems, from softening every edge. But that's just fragility disguised as calm. What happens the moment life doesn't cooperate? When something unexpected crashes through your day? If your peace is built on everything going right, it was never real to begin with. The Stoics knew this. That's why they didn't just tolerate discomfort. They welcomed it, because it trains the body and mind to stay steady. It teaches you how to breathe when everything around you is gasping for air. Voluntary discomfort isn't suffering for the sake of pain, it's preparation. When you put yourself in controlled difficulty, you give your nervous system a new language. You teach it to stay composed when your heart races. You remind it that you are not every sensation you feel. Cold showers, hard workouts, fasting, silence, all of it rewires your threshold. It gives your mind evidence that you can sit with things that once overwhelmed you, that you don't need to run from tension. You can meet it, observe it, move through it without being broken by it. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." He wasn't glorifying suffering. He was pointing to its role in awakening, because real clarity doesn't come when you're tucked in comfort. It arrives in the tension between who you are and who you're becoming. It's shaped in the hours you want to quit but don't, in the moments where you feel like falling apart but decide to hold yourself together just a little longer. Discomfort exposes the noise. When you step into it willingly, the mind shows its cards. You begin to notice how much of your anxiety is just resistance, not reality. The dread of discomfort is often louder than the discomfort itself. But once you face it, you hear things more clearly. The false urgency, the craving for validation, the internal pressure to escape yourself. These voices lose power the moment you stop reacting and start witnessing. And what happens next is subtle but profound. You start to hear the signal beneath the noise. You begin to distinguish between what screams for your attention and what actually deserves it. You stop living in reaction and start living in alignment, not because the world is quieter, but because you are, because you've trained your system to respond instead of panic, to reflect instead of flee, to sit in discomfort and still keep your posture, your breath, your mind. This doesn't mean you become cold. It means you become grounded, rooted, not easily shaken by the tremors that send others into spirals. And you'll notice something else too. When others avoid, you approach. When others retreat, you hold firm. You'll begin to seek out the edges, not because you enjoy pain, but because you trust your capacity to face it. That trust is power. It's inner freedom. It's the kind of clarity that doesn't crack under pressure. And let's be honest, life will test you. Whether you train for it or not, it will arrive with its storms. It will press your limits. And if you've never practiced discomfort, you'll collapse into confusion. But if you've built yourself to meet adversity, you'll recognize it as familiar. You'll stand, not because it's easy, but because you've trained for this. Every cold morning, every uncomfortable silence, every moment you delayed gratification, those were your rehearsals for the real thing. Stillness isn't a trait, it's a skill that's sharpened by friction. Each time you step into something difficult and remain steady, you build more than resilience. You build clarity. You strip away what's unneeded. You silence the parts of the mind that feed on distraction and drama. And what's left is something sharper, something lighter, something that knows how to move without chaos. This is how the Stoics cultivated inner peace, not by escaping the world, but by sharpening themselves against it. They didn't complain about the weight. They became stronger, and that strength didn't make them louder. It made them quieter, less reactive, more intentional, more anchored in their principles. When you practice discomfort regularly, it stops feeling like an enemy. It becomes a teacher, a mirror, a forge. You learn how to breathe through the burn instead of flinching from it. You learn that suffering isn't always a sign to stop. Sometimes it's the sign that you're stepping into the truth, that you're removing what no longer serves you, that you're getting closer to your real limits, and therefore closer to your real self. It's tempting to seek comfort as a reward. But clarity rarely rewards comfort seekers. It reveals itself to those who endure, who strip away the unnecessary, who choose the discomfort of growth over the illusion of ease. Because that kind of discomfort leaves something behind. It builds a foundation, it sharpens awareness, it makes your mind more still, not because the world changed, but because you did. So the next time discomfort arises, don't run, don't numb it, don't rationalize it away. Step into it with eyes open and breath steady. Let it teach you, let it shape you, and know that on the other side of that friction is something you cannot find through comfort alone. Not just toughness, but clarity. Not just endurance, but peace. The kind that stays, no matter what comes. Every time you choose a fleeting pleasure over your deeper aim, you train your mind to serve impulse over intention. And each time you surrender to impulse, you weaken the part of you that seeks clarity. Not because pleasure is wrong, but because unchecked indulgence makes your vision blur. You begin to mistake stimulation for meaning and satisfaction for progress. And that's where clarity erodes, not in some dramatic collapse, but in the slow erosion of your ability to wait, to pause, to choose. Impulse feels like urgency. It rushes in and convinces you that now is everything, that the craving must be answered, that resistance is repression. But that's the trick. The more you indulge your cravings without reflection, the more your mind becomes dependent on the next fix. And over time, your threshold for silence, for stillness, for patience, it shrinks. You become someone who can't sit without reaching, can't think without noise, can't rest without some sort of high. And in that state, the deeper voice inside you, the one that actually knows what matters, gets drowned out. Stoicism understood this long before the science of dopamine ever came along. The ancient thinkers observed the pattern that when you give everything to the moment, you lose sight of the horizon. Marcus Aurelius warned, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, and if your thoughts are ruled by gratification, your soul becomes tinted by restlessness. It starts chasing intensity instead of peace, movement instead of meaning, action instead of direction." But something powerful happens the moment you delay gratification. When you pause before acting on desire, you start to stretch the space between impulse and action, and that space is where the mind begins to see clearly again, where you catch the instinct, observe it, question it, and ask, "Does this serve who I'm becoming, or just soothe who I am right now?" Delaying pleasure isn't about punishment. It's about preservation. It's a way of honoring your future self, of building a relationship with that version of you who lives beyond the craving, who sees the long game, who knows that pleasure, when earned, is richer than anything instantly consumed. Because it doesn't just taste good, it means something. Modern life trains us in the opposite direction. Everything is designed to be fast, on demand, and endless. Food, entertainment, validation, it's all one swipe away. And the easier it is to access, the easier it is to lose yourself in it. You don't even realize you're escaping. It just feels normal. But the price is subtle, a constant fog, an underlying anxiety, a vague feeling that you're drifting further from yourself without even knowing why. That's why delaying pleasure isn't just a moral idea, it's a psychological reset. Each act of restraint is a signal to your mind, I'm in control, not the craving, not the algorithm, not the habit, me. And when you consistently prove that to yourself, you build trust, you build momentum, you build the kind of discipline that doesn't feel like restriction, it feels like liberation, because you no longer need to chase, you can choose. Clarity begins to return when the noise quiets, and noise thrives on unchecked pleasure. Think about it. How many moments of reflection have been hijacked by a scroll, a snack, a notification? It's not just about delaying the big pleasures, it's the small ones. The ones that seem harmless, the mindless comforts. They stack, they compound, and they teach your brain that every moment must be filled, satisfied, entertained. But clarity grows in the empty spaces, in the discomfort, in the silence between urges. This doesn't mean you need to live like a monk. It means you learn how to say not now without feeling like you're depriving yourself. You start to understand that real power isn't in having what you want. It's in knowing you don't need it immediately. That kind of power builds a mind that's not swayed by appetite, a mind that can hear itself think, that can pause long enough to question its own motives. That's how vision is restored, not by doing more, but by wanting less. Pleasure, when earned, carries a different energy. It's deeper, fuller. When you work towards something and then finally allow yourself to enjoy it, it doesn't feel hollow. It feels deserved. And that experience becomes memorable, not because it was intense, but because it was in alignment. It matched your values. It respected your purpose. And in that space, even pleasure becomes a form of clarity. A signal that you're walking the path, not running from it. It's not always glamorous. There will be days when the craving screams louder than your purpose, when the idea of waiting feels unbearable. But each time you resist, you're not just saying no, you're saying yes to something higher, to a deeper peace, to a mind that isn't pulled in every direction, but walks with steadiness, to a life that isn't built on impulse, but on insight. And eventually, it becomes second nature. You stop reacting and start choosing. You begin to notice the difference between what tempts you and what aligns with you. You stop seeing discomfort as a signal to stop, and start seeing it as the doorway to focus, to presence, to real peace. There's a kind of quiet confidence that grows in this process, a trust that you can carry yourself through temptation without needing to escape, that your mind doesn't panic at boredom, that your nervous system doesn't collapse at stillness, that you've trained it to see beyond the now. And in that space, clarity doesn't just return, it expands, it deepens, it becomes your default. So if you want to sharpen your mind, begin by sharpening your will. Learn to delay the rush, to hold the craving in your palm without needing to obey it. Watch it rise, watch it fall, and realize it doesn't control you. And with each moment you hold that line, you're not just getting stronger, you're becoming clearer, more intentional, more whole. Impulse may offer quick relief, but discipline offers long vision. And if clarity is what you're after, it begins the moment you stop feeding every urge and start feeding the future you're trying to create. The mind is a narrator that never sleeps. It weaves meaning into everything, stitching together facts and emotions, memories and fears to form a story that feels real. But here's the thing most people never question. Just because a story feels true doesn't mean it is. And if you never pause to examine the story your mind is telling you, you might live an entire life reacting to something that was never accurate in the first place. That's where clarity begins, not in knowing everything, but in realizing you don't have to believe everything you think. Most people don't realize how deeply they're trapped in their mental narrative. They wake up and step into a role they didn't write. They react not to the world as it is, but to the world as it's been described to them by their past, their parents, their pain. And the longer these stories go unquestioned, the more they begin to define your reality. Suddenly, "I'm not good enough" isn't just a thought, it's a truth. "Nothing ever works out for me" becomes a pattern. "They're probably judging me" becomes a lens through which every interaction is filtered. And slowly, your story becomes a cage. This is why the Stoics were so committed to introspection, to examining not just what happened, but how they interpreted it. Because they understood that the mind isn't a passive receiver of truth, it's a storyteller. And like any storyteller, it can exaggerate, it can distort, it can repeat the same tired script until you don't even realize you're acting it out. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That unconscious is made up of stories. Some you inherited, some you absorbed, and some you crafted in moments of pain. But if you never hold those stories up to the light, if you never ask where they came from or whether they still serve you, you become a character in a plot that never evolves. Clarity begins when you stop treating every thought as a command, when you learn to witness the mind's storytelling without immediately signing off on it. You start to ask, is this story helpful? Is it kind? Is it even real? That questioning creates space, and in that space, freedom lives. Because now you're not reacting, you're reflecting, you're choosing. But that kind of awareness takes courage, because some of these stories have been with you for so long, they feel like home, even if they hurt you, even if they limit you. It's easier to stay in a painful story you recognize than to step into the unknown without a script. But that's where transformation begins, in the discomfort of not knowing who you are without the old plotline. You don't need to replace every negative story with a positive one. That's just a new costume. What you need is honesty, curiosity, a willingness to sit with a thought without clinging to it, to say, maybe that's not the whole truth. And from that space of openness, you begin to see reality more clearly. You stop filtering everything through your insecurities, your assumptions, your past. And when the story stops controlling you, you become lighter, not because life is easier, but because you're not dragging around narratives that no longer belong to you. You stop assigning meaning to every little event. You stop taking everything personally. You stop trying to force the plot to go a certain way. And ironically, that's when you start to feel more in control, not because you're manipulating the story, but because you're no longer imprisoned by it. Think about how many moments of anxiety, of anger, of despair are really just reactions to a story, not to what's happening, but to what you think is happening, to the conclusion your mind jumped to, the assumption it made, the prediction it crafted based on old wounds. And how different would your life be if you just took a breath before believing it? That's not easy. The mind loves certainty, and stories provide that. Even painful stories feel stable. But the Stoic path isn't about comfort, it's about clarity. And clarity often demands that you step outside the script, that you challenge your role, that you sit with silence instead of rushing to narrate every experience. Because sometimes the most honest response is, "I don't know yet." And that's okay. There's a discipline in this, a kind of mental hygiene. Every day your mind will offer up 1,000 little storylines, some seductive, some scary, some familiar. But the Stoic mind doesn't bite the hook right away. It observes, it questions, it holds space. And from that patience comes a deeper vision, a kind of seeing that doesn't need to label everything. You begin to discover that you are not the story. You are the space the story moves through. And in that space, you can choose how much power a thought gets. You can allow a narrative to rise, to speak, and to pass. That's when the mind clears, not because it's empty, but because it's no longer chaotic, because the narrator no longer runs the show. This isn't about perfection. You'll still get caught sometimes. You'll still believe thoughts that aren't true. But the difference is, you'll notice faster. You'll return sooner. You'll start to see your mind not as a master, but as a tool, one you can use, sharpen, guide. And over time, that changes everything. You'll still live your story, but now you're the one writing it. You're the one choosing which parts to carry forward and which to release. You're no longer just reacting to the script. You're editing it. You're refining it. And more importantly, you're creating space for the truth to emerge. Not the convenient truth, not the inherited truth, but the kind that comes from silence, stillness, and courage. Because clarity isn't loud. It doesn't scream over your thoughts. It waits beneath them. And the moment you stop clinging to the storyline, you finally hear it. Most people don't even notice when they've slipped into the role of the victim. It starts quietly. A small complaint here, a bit of blame there, a subtle expectation that the world should have gone differently, that someone should have treated you better, that circumstances should have been kinder. But slowly, those little grievances pile up. And without realizing it, you begin to live not as a participant in your life, but as a spectator, waiting, resenting, hoping someone or something will change your situation for you. The more you blame, the more you wait. And the more you wait, the further you drift from your own strength. Blame is seductive. It gives you a temporary sense of clarity. Someone did this to me. Life wronged me. I was overlooked. I was hurt. And while there may be truth in those experiences, staying stuck in them offers no solution. Stoicism doesn't deny that people can be cruel, that life can be unfair, that pain is real. But it teaches you something far more powerful. You get to decide what happens next. Your response is yours alone. No matter how chaotic or unjust the world may seem, your power begins the moment you stop pointing outward and start looking inward. Taking responsibility doesn't mean taking the blame for everything that happens. It means choosing how you will move forward. It's not about pretending things didn't hurt or minimizing the impact. It's about refusing to let those moments define who you become. You can acknowledge your pain without surrendering to it. You can face injustice without becoming bitter, and you can carry your scars without turning them into chains. There is strength in that quiet refusal to play the victim, in saying, "This happened, but it will not control me." The danger of the victim mindset is that it subtly rewrites your story. You begin to see yourself as someone who life happens to, instead of someone who responds to life. Every difficulty becomes another confirmation that you're powerless, and the more you believe that, the more true it becomes. Not because it is, but because you're living as if it is. Victimhood isn't just about pain, it's about identity. And the longer you wear that identity, the harder it becomes to imagine yourself without it. Carl Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." That's not just philosophy, that's power. You don't need to erase your past to reclaim your strength. You need to reframe your position in it. Are you the one who was hurt, or the one who rose anyway? Are you the one who was wronged, or the one who became wiser through it? Your suffering can either be the foundation for resentment or the soil where resilience grows. You choose. There's something liberating about letting go of the question, "Why me?" It sounds like a search for understanding, but more often it's a quiet form of resistance, a refusal to accept reality as it is. But the Stoic mind doesn't linger there. It knows that the question that really matters is, what now? Because life doesn't pause for you to get over it. It keeps moving, and the more time you spend wishing the past was different, the more you miss your chance to shape the future. When you stop seeing yourself as a victim, you reclaim your ability to act. You become someone who makes decisions, not someone waiting for decisions to be made for them. You become grounded in reality, not the one you wish for, but the one you're in. That's where real clarity starts. Not from getting what you wanted, but from understanding what you still have and what you can do with it. And often, you'll find you have more power than you thought. Not because your life is easy, but because you're not looking for easy anymore. But this mindset takes work, especially when you've been hurt deeply or unfairly. It's easier to stay angry, to keep the wound open, to wait for an apology that may never come. But that kind of waiting costs you something. It costs you your peace. It keeps you tethered to people and events that no longer deserve your energy. Forgiveness in this context isn't about excusing the past. It's about releasing yourself from it. It's about saying, "I refuse to carry this any further." Not because it didn't matter, but because I matter more. There's a quiet strength in people who've let go of blame. You can feel it. They're not loud. They're not trying to prove anything. They're just free. They walk into the room with the weight of their own choices. They speak from a place that isn't reactive, but rooted. They don't need to convince you of their pain because they've already made peace with it. That kind of presence doesn't come from being untouched by life. It comes from refusing to let life harden you into something you're not. And when others try to pull you into drama, into blame, into endless cycles of justification, you'll feel the difference. Because now you've tasted what it means to be responsible for your mind, your emotions, your direction, and you won't want to trade that for a moment of pity or validation. You'll stop needing to explain yourself. You'll stop looking for people to agree with your suffering. You'll simply live, clear, present, and strong, in the knowledge that your power was never outside you. This doesn't mean you won't feel pain anymore. It means pain won't confuse you. It won't make you forget who you are. It won't make you forget what you're capable of. You'll still fall, you'll still bleed, but you'll rise faster, because you know your footing is not in fairness. It's in focus. And your clarity comes not from how others treat you, but from how you treat yourself when life gets difficult. So the next time something unfair happens, and it will, Notice the first instinct. Is it to collapse, to blame, to relive the story again and again? Or is it to pause, to breathe, to ask yourself quietly but firmly, what now? That's the question that moves you. That's the shift that opens the door. And that's where your power lives. Not in what happened, but in who you choose to be next. At the end of the day, when the noise quiets down and no one's watching, that's when the real work begins. Reflection isn't a soft ritual, it's a weapon, not to beat yourself down, but to cut through the fog. To ask with honesty and courage, who was I today? Not who I pretended to be or who I hoped they saw, but who I actually was when it mattered most. This simple practice, done in silence, holds the power to redirect your entire life. Because without observation, the mind drifts. Without self-examination, you live out patterns you never chose. Most people don't reflect because it forces them to confront contradiction. The gap between what they said and what they did, between the values they claim and the actions they take. But that discomfort is exactly the point. You're not supposed to feel perfect during reflection. You're supposed to feel real. And real is where growth happens. It's where illusions break. It's where the distance between who you are and who you want to become becomes clear, not as a judgment, but as a compass. Clarity isn't a sudden event. It's not something that happens to you. It's something you build day by day in the quiet. The more you reflect, the more you refine your inner map. You start to notice the habits that drain you, the reactions that hijack your peace, the conversations that leave you misaligned. You start to sense when you're drifting from yourself, and that awareness, over time, becomes precision. You begin to live on purpose, not perfectly, but deliberately, and that alone sets you apart. This is why the Stoics treated self-examination like a daily ritual. It wasn't optional, it was essential. Because without it, you fall asleep at the wheel of your own life. You end up living someone else's version of who you should be. And nothing is more dangerous than drifting unconsciously through your own existence. Seneca once said, "The life unexamined is not worth living for a man." Not because life without reflection is meaningless, but because it's directionless. There's a powerful question that can change everything. Did I lose myself today? You might have said all the right things, nodded when expected, smiled politely. But did you bend your truth to avoid discomfort? Did you betray your own rhythm just to keep the peace? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones. Because without knowing when you lose yourself, how will you ever find your way back? And then there's the other side of reflection, the wins you ignore, the moments you stood firm, the time you stayed quiet instead of reacting, the choice to walk away when ego wanted to stay. These small victories matter, because when you recognize them, you train your brain to remember who you're becoming. You build inner momentum, and in a world obsessed with outcomes, reflection reminds you of the integrity behind every invisible win. Reflection also teaches you something humbling, how often you are the storm, not them, not the world, you. Your emotions, your expectations, your stories. You begin to see how many of your struggles were self-created. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. And in that realization is a strange kind of freedom. Because if you created the storm, you can also calm it. If you caused the chaos, you can choose stillness. That's exactly what nightly reflection is, making the unconscious conscious, not in some dramatic ceremonial way, but simply by sitting with yourself for 5 honest minutes and asking, where did I show up fully today? And where did I abandon myself without even noticing? The truth is, self-reflection isn't about perfection. It's about awareness. And awareness doesn't always feel good. In fact, it often stings. But that sting is a sign you've touched something real, something worth exploring, something worth changing. Most people avoid this because it threatens their comfort. But you're not here for comfort. You're here for clarity. You're here for control, not over the world, but over your own mind. You don't need a journal. You don't need a therapist every night. You just need honesty. Sit with the events of your day and ask yourself, did I honor my values or just my impulses? Did I act with intention or did I let the moment own me? The more you ask, the sharper your self-understanding becomes. And soon, it's not just a nightly ritual, it's a way of living. Eventually, you begin to anticipate the reflection before it even happens. You find yourself mid-action thinking, will this feel right later? That's when you know the shift has begun. That's when your values stop being something you reflect on at night and start becoming something you live by in real time. And that's the real goal, not just to look back clearly, but to live forward with purpose. The world moves fast. It praises speed, constant motion, reaction over response. But reflection slows you down, not to weaken you, but to anchor you. It grounds your decisions. It gives your day meaning, because a day that is not reflected on slips into the past unexamined. It becomes another lost opportunity, another silent compromise, and those days, stacked one on top of another, become a life you don't even recognize. So tonight, before the world steals your attention again, take that moment. Look at yourself not through the eyes of guilt or shame, but through the eyes of someone who is still learning, still refining, still becoming. Because that's what this is. Not a judgment, not a scorecard, but a mirror. One that doesn't lie, one that shows you what you've been avoiding, and one that, if you're brave enough to look, can change your life. The loudest voices often carry the least wisdom. They fill the room with noise, draw eyes with chaos, and mask confusion with confidence. But clarity doesn't scream. It doesn't chase attention or demand applause. It hums quietly in the background, found in the lives of those who no longer feel the need to prove themselves. They move with a calm that doesn't need explanation. They don't have to shout because their presence speaks louder than their words ever could. And if you're seeking clarity in a world obsessed with noise, don't follow the popular. Study the peaceful. It's tempting to get pulled toward those who command the spotlight, the ones who speak fast, post often, and always have something clever to say. But beneath that surface energy, there's often a lack of depth. Many people perform wisdom, fewer people live it. And the only way to know the difference is to pay attention, not to their words, but to their rhythm. The wise live in alignment. Their habits match their values. Their silence carries more weight than most people's speeches. They're not addicted to being seen because they've already seen themselves. To emulate the wise is not to imitate their exact steps, but to study their structure. How do they respond to difficulty? How do they treat others when no one's watching? How do they carry themselves through failure, success, boredom? The answers are subtle. They're not found in a highlight reel or a podcast clip. They're found in consistent behavior over time, in how someone holds the same values even when it's inconvenient, in how they protect their peace instead of performing their power. Clarity often lives in contradiction to popularity, because clarity is earned in solitude, while popularity is chased through performance. The wise don't beg for understanding. They don't over-explain. They don't argue to be right. They move with the kind of restraint that comes from knowing who they are and who they're not. If you watch closely, they live by a quiet code, not a code imposed by others, but one they've etched into themselves through years of observation, failure, discipline, and reflection. When you find someone like that, don't just listen to what they say. Observe how they navigate. Watch the way they make decisions. Look at how they respond to insult or praise. Do they react or do they choose? Do they get louder or do they grow still? Do they need validation or do they quietly validate themselves? These are the signs. These are the patterns that separate the truly wise from the merely popular. Seneca wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." But that improvement doesn't always come through advice. Often it comes through modeling, through seeing over and over again how someone's behavior reflects their inner stability. You begin to absorb it without realizing. Their discipline becomes a mirror for your own potential. Their silence becomes an invitation to deepen your own thoughts. Their consistency challenges your excuses. The problem is, we often look in the wrong direction. We scroll past the steady in favor of the flashy. We assume louder means better, more followers means more truth. But the wise have always walked a different path. You don't find them in every room. You find them in the corner, observing. You don't hear them always speaking. You feel the impact when they do. And that's the kind of life worth emulating. Not loud, not urgent, but rooted. Emulating the wise doesn't mean worshipping a person. It means extracting principles. It means learning how to filter distraction, manage emotion, prioritize what matters. It means studying the quiet mechanics of mental discipline. How some people get up every day and stay aligned, not because life is easy for them, but because they've made clarity more important than comfort. And perhaps most importantly, the wise don't seek to be admired. They're not here to impress. They're here to live rightly. They may share insights, but never to dominate. Their way is one of invitation, not intimidation. When they speak, it's not to prove anything. It's to reveal something, usually something you already knew deep down, but were too distracted to face. That's why their words stay with you, because they echo a deeper truth that already lives inside you. Carl Jung once said, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." The wise know this. That's why they don't force their way on others. They live their truth and let it speak for itself. Your job is not to become them. It's to observe the structure of their stillness and translate it into your own path. To take what resonates and discard what doesn't. Because wisdom isn't imitation, it's integration. In a world where the loud often drown out the steady, choosing to emulate the wise is a rebellion. It means stepping off the stage and into the practice. It means measuring your progress not by who's watching, but by who you're becoming. It means resisting the pull of shallow influence in favor of deep integrity. And that's a rare thing. But rare is what makes it powerful. If you're serious about clarity, watch closely. Not to copy, but to calibrate. Pay attention to the ones who live what others only preach. The ones who don't post every habit, but embody discipline in everything they do. The ones who don't explain their boundaries, but live within them unapologetically. Let them be your compass, not because they're perfect, but because they've chosen peace over popularity. And one day, when others wonder how you found your rhythm, your quiet, your clarity, you'll know the answer. You stopped chasing noise, you started watching the steady, and eventually you became it. Most people chase peace the same way they chase happiness, like it's something waiting on the other side of achievement. They think it lives in a perfect bank account, a relationship without tension, a day without problems. But peace that depends on circumstances is not peace. It's just a pause between problems. The Stoics understood this deeply. Peace isn't something that waits for you at the end of the chaos. It's something you bring with you into the middle of it. We grow up conditioned to think we have to earn calm, that we must first conquer, fix, impress, and prove ourselves before we get to rest. So we attach peace to milestones. We say, once I make this amount of money, I'll feel okay. Or, Once they understand me, then I'll be calm. But this is a dangerous illusion, because even when you reach the milestone, the mind moves the goalpost. There's always another thing to solve, another reason to delay peace. And so we live in a state of permanent postponement, always chasing, never arriving. A clear mind is not the reward at the end of a perfect day. It's the baseline you learn to return to, even in the storm. It's the place you stand, not the thing you search for. Because life doesn't wait to be peaceful before it throws you a challenge. The world won't pause just because you need a break. That's why the Stoics trained daily, not in theory, but in practice. They weren't trying to avoid chaos. They were becoming strong enough to walk through it without being undone by it. When peace becomes your default, something powerful shifts. You stop reacting to everything like it's a personal attack. You stop needing constant reassurance, constant stimulation, constant proof that things are okay. Instead, you start creating okayness from the inside out. You stop demanding that the world makes you feel safe, and you start becoming the kind of person who feels steady regardless of the noise around them. This doesn't mean you don't feel emotions. It means your emotions don't own you. It means you can feel frustration without becoming bitter. You can feel stress without snapping. You can feel fear without folding, because peace isn't the absence of emotion. It's the mastery of your response to it. It's the space between what happens and how you choose to meet it. And once you realize that space exists, you realize peace is always available, even when comfort isn't. When you make peace your foundation, people will notice. They might not understand it, but they'll feel it. You won't flinch at every inconvenience. You won't match every insult with outrage. You won't chase noise just to feel alive. Instead, you'll carry yourself with a kind of quiet intensity, a confidence that doesn't need to be loud, a calm that doesn't need to be explained. You'll become the calm in the room, not because nothing can shake you, but because you've trained yourself not to be dragged by every shake. Carl Jung once said, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness. The word happy would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness." The same is true for peace. You don't build it by avoiding the difficult. You build it by walking through difficulty without letting it change your core. You carry it into arguments, into loss, into confusion, not because you're immune, but because you're anchored. And the more you practice that, the more peace becomes second nature. It's no longer something you search for after the fire dies down. It's what you walk into the fire holding. And that makes all the difference. Because when others panic, you pause. When they overreact, you observe. When they seek control, you surrender. Not as weakness, but as wisdom. We often think surrender means giving up. But in Stoic terms, it means letting go of what isn't yours to carry. It means being rooted in what you can control, your breath, your tone, your posture, your attention. It means choosing not to be baited by the world's chaos. That's where real peace comes from. Not from fixing everything out there, but from managing what's in here, your own inner terrain. So you keep practicing. You return to your breath. You notice your thoughts without letting them spiral. You remind yourself again and again that peace is a skill, not a gift. That even in conflict, you can stay grounded. That even when your mind wants to react, you can respond with clarity. And over time, that becomes who you are. Not just someone who finds peace on the weekend, or after the workout, or once the inbox is clear, but someone who brings peace wherever they go, because that's the ultimate clarity. When you stop seeing peace as a reward and start seeing it as a requirement. When you stop waiting for everything to calm down before you decide to feel calm. When you stop negotiating with chaos and start anchoring yourself in presence. That's when you realize you were never chasing peace. You were just remembering where it lives, and it lives in you. Always has. You just had to stop running, stop fixing, Stop proving and start choosing. Peace isn't the prize, it's the path. It's the way you stand, the way you move, the way you think, the way you return again and again to who you truly are, beneath the noise. Let others wait for the perfect moment to feel clear. You already know the truth. The clear mind isn't earned through escape. It's built through embodiment. Peace isn't after, it's now. It's here, and it's yours. If you make it your default. Stillness isn't a destination, it's a decision. The moment you choose clarity over chaos, presence over panic, peace becomes your power. It's not something the world gives you, it's something you become. Watch one of the videos on your screen now to continue sharpening your mind and deepening your inner strength. And thank you truly for being a part of Stoic Journal.